Just finishing some erasing here. It's a very famous part of the attack. It's like really the bulk of the attack is told in this chapter. Though it's not the first day, we still get a famous episode of Roman success and bravery of soldiers. So going through it pretty quickly. Septima, we got 7th. It looks ablative. Probably need a time word. And I get it here, right? On the 7th day of the oppugnatio. This looks like an ablative absolute, right? With a very great ventus, wind. Looks like having been verbed, but orior and its compounds is deponent. And so having verb with a very great wind, having oriored, having arisen. We know that word. As to rise, ferventes looks like a participle or maybe an adjective. Could be describing my subject or my object. Fusilli, that looks weird, maybe nominative. But when I see ex argila, I'm like, oh, that's probably a nice little ablative phrase. Fusilli could be the ablative form of a third declension adjective ending. Ferventes then, now I know, is describing glandis. Fundis looks like a different ablative. Et, and ferve facta jacula, that looks like maybe it's also subject or maybe also object, just like ferventes glandes. In casas, qua, erant tecti. There's my verb. Okay, these have got to be my objects because it means on the 7th day of the attack with a great, very big wind having arisen, they began to yakari, they began to hurl or to throw. And then these are things that the enemies can throw, right? Ferventes, participle, but really an adjective, kind of sounds like both. Boiling hot from ferveo, fervera. Boiling hot glandes can mean acorns, but we're going to say bullets. The word is the same in Latin. Not a bullet like from a modern gun, but like an object you would hurl from a slingshot. So that's what's going on. And you make those out of clay, and that's what Caesar says. Fusilli ex argila, out of or of soft clay. They began to throw boiling hot bullets made out of or just of soft clay, fundis, with or from their slings. And they also began to throw, related to ferventes, we'll just say heated javelins into the casas, which you guys know is a Spanish word for a house. In Latin, it's a small house or a hut, or in the terms of our Roman camp, we could say like into the cabins, which more Gallico, which is probably my subject, more Gallico, in Gallic fashion, stramentis looks also ablative, but a different ablative from more Gallico, erant tecti, which had been covered with straw in Gallic fashion. So we're in Gallic territory. We're going to build our houses the same way they build their little houses. And so covered in straw. What happens when you throw really hot things at straw? Oh man, you guessed it. These huts or cabins quickly ignem comprehenderunt, caught fire. And did they do something else? Venti looks like it could be a new subject, like these caught fire, and the winds. Or it looks like it could be genitive, maybe going with magnitudine, like the strength of the wind, or like the magnitude of the wind. Don't know yet. We'll hold on to that. In omnem definitely goes with locum, and we'll throw castrorum genitive with it. My verb is distulerunt. Now, winds need to, like, I don't want to say like the huts caught fire and they scattered, so I do need the winds to be the subject of distulerunt. And the winds scattered or spread the fire into every part of the camp. Now, the question is, what do I do with magnitudine as a lonely ablative? I would say because of their magnitude, because of their, I don't know, greatness, because of their force, scattered the fire, into every part of the camp. Oh, that's good for the enemies, bad for the Romans. And so what do the enemies do? The enemies maximo clamore, ablative, right? Clearly ablative of manner with a very loud shout, as if parta jam aquae explorata victoria is an ablative absolute. It's going to sound something like as if with victory already having been obtained and confirmed, or already having been gained and confirmed. Ablative absolutes can also be translated like as cum clauses, but with an as if. I mean, like since victory, that doesn't sound good either. But we could make it like just a verb and say as if victory had already been obtained and confirmed. But it's also fine, even when it's clunky, to stick with the literal translation of the ablative absolute. The enemies, with a very loud shout, as if with victory having already been gained and confirmed. What did the enemies do? Tures testudines quae agere looks like an object and an infinitive, and scalis valum, a scendere object and an infinitive, then my verb, began to agere, to drive those towers that they built and those sheds, right? Began to drive their towers and their sheds, and to ascendere the wallum with ladders, scalis, with ladders. Oh man, our camp is like, it's like on fire. There's fire happening. The huts are on fire. And the enemies have built these towers that if they push them up close to the wall, they'll be able to like get into the wall, right? Because they built them up to the height of the wall. And then they built those movable sheds so they can safely approach close to the wall. And they've got ladders. Oh man. But Tanta. Militum virtus aquae ea praesentia anime flu. Nice. And it's a T word, and then I see an ut. So this is my main clause. My ut clause, of course, since I had a T word in my main clause, is going to be a result clause. But, oh noes, it's interrupted immediately by a cum clause. Cum undique flammatore renter. Oh man, it continues. Maximaque premerenter suaque intelligerent, end cum clause, resume result clause, ut known through a subjunctive verb, de ceteret, but also subjunctive verb and another subjunctive verb. So my result clause completes the sentence. So I have a very short main clause, a very long result clause in blue that is interrupted by a very long cum clause. Let's take it one clause at a time. But so great doesn't go with the soldiers, but it can go with virtus. So great virtue, or even so great was the virtue, the courage, the bravery of the soldiers, and the presence of mind. And so I could put soldiers at the end if I wanted. So great was the courage and presence of mind of the soldiers, right? Or so great was the soldiers, apostrophe, courage and presence of mind, that. When, since, or although, probably although, right? That although they were being tormented on all sides by flamma, gotta be ablative, right? By flamma with my passive verb, and they were being premerentered, overwhelmed by an ablative, right? The greatest goes with multitudine, right? Multitude, amount of tellorum, weapons, and they intelligerented, they understood or realized, which is going to explain why I had an infinitive here, because I've got an accusative and they realized that although they were being torrented and they were being premerentered, and they realized that, indirect statement, all their baggage and all their belongings, right, their personal stuff was on fire. So even though they realized that, so great was their courage and presence of mind that non modo sed, we typically get like sed etiam. This time it's like non modo sed quidem, not only, but also. That not only verb subject, but also verb subject and subject verb. Not only did nobody depart from the wall for the sake of abandoning it, right? Causa plus the genitive gerund. But, like, hardly even anyone looked back. Hardly even anyone looked back. It's a little weird because there's lots of extra little words in Latin, but hardly even anyone looked back. And at that time, everybody was fighting very fiercely and very bravely. Good for our soldiers. They're like, we don't even care. We're here to defend the camp. Forget our stuff, right? All right. Sounds bad, but we're fighting bravely. So this day was the most severe, most serious for our guys. Caesar word by far. But nevertheless, Hunk goes with it. Wensum, it had this outcome. I guess an implied result clause. That on that day, subject, the greatest number, I need a genitive, of soldiers, of enemies, was wounded and killed. New ut clause, but it's got indicative verbs, so it's just going to mean as, or in as much as. Yeah. So why were so many enemies being killed if they were attacking us so well? Here's why. Like, as, say, looks like my object, so ipso wallows ablative. They had like jammed themselves, right? They had crowded themselves, and subject verb, the last ones were not giving a retreat to the first ones. Just like when we were in the valley, right? And the Romans had kind of like trapped themselves. That's what the Gauls did. They got up close to the wall and the first ones there, and then the last ones in were not giving them any space to retreat. So when the Romans started doing well, they were jammed too tightly. So this day was most serious for us by far, but it had this outcome. On that day, the maximus numerus of hostium was vulnerated and interfigurated. As they had crowded themselves under the wall itself, or under the very wall, and the last ones were not giving a retreat to the first ones. Paulum, quidem, a little bit indeed. Intermissa flamma looks like an ablative absolute. And quodam loco, turia docta looks like an ablative absolute. Quodam loco is probably an ablative of place where, or even like a dative of place to which, because we got a place happening there. Turi adacta et contingente looks like it's still describing the turi. I don't know what to do with wallum just yet. Tertii cohortus looks genitive. I'm going to put it with centuriones. Ex eo quostabant. Oh, eo goes with loco, and then my verb. All right, so my ablative absolutes. With the flame having, indeed, or like but, with the flame having been interrupted a little bit, and with the tower having been driven, I would say to a certain place, the tower having been driven to a certain place, dative of direction, and touching the wall, like as still part of my ablative absolute. With the flame having been interrupted a little, and with the tower driven to a certain place and touching the wall, my subject, the centurions of the third cohort, recasserunt, like withdrew from the place where they were standing, and suos omnes, and they pulled all their guys back. They pulled back all their men. And with a nod and with their voices, hostes could be subject or object, but I think we're still talking about the centurions of the third cohort. So object, verb. And began to call the enemies with a nod and with their voices, if they should wish to come in, if they should wish to enter. So the Romans of the third cohort are like, hey, you guys wanna come in? You know? Kind of taunting them a little bit, right? Of whom, progredi looks like the infinitive, going with ausis est, and then my subject, of whom no one dared to come forth, right? Or none of whom dared to come forth. Then, from every direction, with lapidibus having been connectis, ablative absolute, with stones having been thrown from every direction. Oh no, it's not an ablative absolutes. This is why I should always read the whole sentence first. De turbati is a perfect passive participle. It goes nicely with just a regular ablative of means. Then, having been like dislodged by, or like they having been dislodged, or even like de turbati sunt, at that time they were dislodged. I don't really, yeah, they were dislodged. No, I guess we could say with the stones having been thrown from every direction